There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. It's hot and really windy, and I know I wouldn't be able to find anywhere outside where there wouldn't be wind-related distortion of the mic, so I'm indoors. I've had another great week with Kenji. The second honeymoon continues, and I'm not going to give you any details. We've done some very mundane, important things like getting him a phone and getting that connected and opening a bank account. Maybe some of that was from last week. I can't remember. We did a lot of that, and otherwise just hanging out at home here, and it's just been absolutely lovely. I couldn't be happier. Now, enough about that. Two things about Patreon. I don't mention Patreon very much. Not many of you have joined recently on Patreon. I would always welcome more support, but I'm not going to drone on about it. But let me mention a couple things. If you happen to join at any level my Patreon, all the information about that is in the show notes. I have a giveaway right now, and it closes at 6 p.m. my time on May 15th. And it is for one of the best novels I've read in the last 10 years, translated from the Norwegian, Alberta and Jacob, by Cora Sandel, translated gorgeously by Elizabeth Rokkan. And I have a review of it. I'll put that link in the show notes. It's the first of a trilogy, and each of the volumes I loved, but probably this one has the most standalone quality. Like, you don't need to continue with the series. I don't know why you wouldn't want to, but this is a coming of age, a story about Alberta, who sticks out like a sore thumb in a kind of middle class northern Norwegian. I think I got that right, in the north. And it's a place where there's not much intellectual stimulation. She's under the thumb of her mother, and it's so beautifully emotional. It was such emotional power. I just loved it. That's all I'm going to say. So if you join Patreon soon enough, you can enter your name. You have to enter your name on the post on Patreon. That's the only way you can enter. Number one, you have to be a member of my Patreon. Number two, you have to leave a comment on that post to say, please enter me. And do that all before next Thursday, May 15th. And also, our bookish brunch this month is next Saturday, May 17th. So you could take part in that. Talk about intellectual stimulation. Those are amazing. All right. And I also, separate from Patreon, I have new lovely bookmarks for sale, and I think you need them in your life. Here is a picture. They're gorgeous, high quality paper. People that have bought them love them, and they make great gifts for bookish friends and whatnot. So have a look at that webpage also in the show notes. All right, without further ado, this week's Mr. Guest is particularly fascinating and lively and wonderful. Let's go meet them.
And this week's Mr. Guest is the Scottish writer, Kieron Campbell, joining us from Galloway in Scotland. She is the author of 2 books that I have in my possession and a whole bunch more than that. The first one that I have is from 2022, Paper Cup, and just published about 3 weeks ago, This Bright Life. Kieron, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about where you are in Scotland. I understand you're near a lake or something?
I'm from Glasgow originally, but I live in the southwest of Scotland now. So it's not a lake. I'm near the Solway Firth, which is it's an estuary basically. So it's the seaside, but we're in the countryside as well. So it's very rural, very bucolic, lovely and peaceful. And actually what I found was when we moved here from Glasgow, my writing dried up. It was like I had gone on holiday in my head and everything was mañana, and I had to really give myself a kind of mental slap in the head. Like, come on, wake up. So I'm fine now. But yeah, it took me a couple of years. It was like a different rhythm when we moved here. And I began to worry, do I need the buzz of the city to write? But I didn't. I just needed to find my spot, I guess, again and get in the groove.
Do a reset. And your biography is absolutely fascinating. My God, former police officer, then Glasgow City Council press officer. How much do you think your previous careers have influenced your writing? Do you put those kind of characters into your writing, or does it connect at all?
I think probably the police more than the press office, but I guess both, because within the press office and the council, you're dealing with all sorts of internal communications, external. So with both of those jobs, it's about, I think, and I wasn't planning to be a writer when I was doing either of them, but it's about just learning people. It's about the variety of people that are out there and the fact that you can never second guess how a human being is going to behave, especially in the police. You see people at the worst time of their life and people maybe you think in a really bad situation, but there's some nobility or strength that comes through that surprises you. So I think from the psychology point of view, it's actually both of those jobs have stored away a lot of the stuff that I saw, and it comes out in the writing. I did English at university before I joined the police. So I think it's more like circular. When I was young, I loved books, did English at university. And then by the end of it, it's a good Scots word, I was scunnered with books. Like I'd had enough. They had just lost their magic because I'd been studying them relentlessly. So I decided I was going to do something practical and join the police. But that was the kind of the aberration, if you like, because when I left that job and went to work for the city council, I was working with words again. And then I end up being a writer. So I feel I've gone full circle in a way.
Wow, lucky for us. Why don't we start with your most recent one and kind of work backwards? Tell us about This Bright Life.
It's set in Glasgow. It's set in the east end of Glasgow in a part of it called Denison, which is quite near the sort of medieval heart of the city. There's not much of the medieval heart left of Glasgow. Glasgow keeps reinventing itself, basically knocking itself down and rebuilding itself, but there's wee pockets. But it's one of those sort of areas that it's a bit rough and ready. There's some nice coffee shops and restaurants, but there's also some kind of rough areas and shady characters. So it's one of those places where people live cheap by jowl, different kind of professions, different ages, and particularly there's a lot of tenement flats there. So they're the kind of traditional sandstone 4 or 5 story high flats. And it's quite a sort of community based way of living. People, not so much now, but in the olden days, they maybe take their turn to clean the stairs and things like that. And basically, I wanted to look at this idea of community. I wanted to look at the fact that when you live in that kind of environment or community, really, you're just through the wall from another life, but you don't know what's going on in that person's world, even though you might nod to each other or you might not. To me, that's a kind of metaphor for as humans, we're all in our own wee box. And you don't, even the people that are closest to you, you don't always know what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And in different situations, we're all kind of different people. So that was the kind of beginning. And I always just have an idea at the start of a book. And then I kind of circle it and I think more deeply, what is the actual story? This is the sort of the sense I've got of it's about separate lives that are together. And then the more I teased it out in my head, it's a story about a wee boy called Gerard, who's 12, and it's a story about an old woman who's a widow called Margaret. And it's a story about a 30 something lawyer who's going through a divorce called Claire. And basically, something happens quite near the start of the book that brings them all together. And I wanted to look at this kind of the ripple effects of what happens. And I've only been talking about the book for a few weeks because I've had quite a few launch events. And I was being quite coy at first. I was like, a thing happens, but I shan't tell you what it is. And I was getting myself in circles. And I thought, actually, it's probably better just to put it out there. Gerard's from a rough background. His mum has got addiction issues. His dad's not on the scene, and he's got 2 younger siblings. And one day, and I won't go into detail, but one day he tries to steal this old lady's purse. He needs money. And in the process, he knocks her over. So what was a really bad situation becomes a much worse one because she injures herself badly when she falls. And witnessing this is Claire, the lawyer. So that's your kind of 3 characters. In one moment, they are separate and something happens that kind of connects them all. And then the book looks at the next maybe 3 months of Gerard's life and just what happens. What happens to him? Who's there to help him? Who's there to want him punished? Who's there to help Margaret as well? Because anyone that's been involved in any crime as a victim, you feel your whole world's been turned upside down. You feel, that someone's reached in. It's very personal, even if it's random. With my police hat on, I wanted to look at that too, how that feels to be suddenly vulnerable when you felt quite intact before.
And would you say that this is mostly Gerard's story, or do we follow the other 2 characters that you've mentioned as well?
I would say it's mainly Gerard. He's the kind of spine of the novel, and Claire and Margaret weave round him. So they all have their own voices, the 3 of them. So you see it through those 3 perspectives. And I always find that's quite handy because it allows you to kind of jump cut a wee bit. In terms of pace, it's good, but also if I'm only doing a 3-month period in this boy's life, it's quite good to get the relief or the contrast of somebody else within that time period as well. So yeah, he's the main man, but the other 2 are strong supporting actors.
And this is a Scottish novel. It's very much a Glaswegian novel.
How do you take the girl out of Glasgow? I think everything any writer writes is filtered through their own experience to some degree. And that doesn't mean you have to be parochial and just set things within your own narrow field of vision. But one of the novels I wrote was about a Somali refugee. I'm not obviously a Somali refugee. Another novel I've written is set in Italy in World War II. Again, not my experience. So I think you can push yourself in terms of your subject matter or your character, but I guess what makes you and what you understand as fear or longing or joy, only I know how that feels to me. So it's hard to take yourself away from that. But yeah, in terms of the novel, I guess it could have been set in any city, but Glasgow is renowned for being one of its monikers when I was in the council was it's Glasgow the friendly city, and people make Glasgow, and that's true to some degree, but it can be a bit in your face too. A bit, you might sit down on the bus with some shopping, and a wee woman next to you will say, "Oh, have you been shopping then? What have you bought?" And you think, if your business, there's that kind of engagement. So it lent itself well to this novel, I think, because yeah, I wanted to look at separation, and I also wanted to look at the moment where that bursts and there's connection. So Glasgow seems a sort of city where I think this story could have happened anywhere, but yeah, it definitely fitted well.
Is there anything you want to tell us about the title, This Bright Life? It's a lovely title.
Thank you. It wasn't the first title. The first title was Tenement. That was my working title. So you'll see from the cover, it is exactly that. It's the idea of different windows and different lives framed within them, but they're all framed within something bigger. So I've often found with novels, it's when it gets to the kind of cover design stage, that's when the publishers usually have this chat with you. It's, we just can't see this cover, and we're not sure that the name's got enough reach, and when people know what Tenement is. And so I, as always, try and fight my corner. And there's always to and fro, and nobody ever forces you into anything, but everyone wants the best for the book. And when I was trying to talk about why this idea of tenement was so important, I quoted a wee bit towards the end of the book, which is about Claire looking down street in Glasgow, and she sees the sunlight hitting off windows, and she's thinking about all the lights that have ever shone out of those windows, from candlelight, gas lamp to electricity, and it's like a hopeful pulse in itself. And then that idea of, yeah, this bright life, it sums that up, and it also speaks specifically to Gerard, who is a troubled wee boy, but he's smart and he just needs some help. He just needs people to be on his side and to have choices that he maybe doesn't even know exist. So it worked for him, and it worked for this idea of a hope and a community shining out of maybe dark places.
Some of what you've described about Gerard's family background reminds me of the world of a Douglas Stewart novel set in Glasgow. Is that a good comparison?
Honestly, don't know because I haven't read Shuggy Bane. I have it on my shelf and I've never read it. So
fascinating.
yeah, I'd already was quite well into this book before Shuggy Bane came out, I think. And I purposely thought, I don't want to read it. I don't want anything to bleed into my story. So I don't know. It's been compared to it, but in reviews and things. But I suppose there's also, it's like people like to condense in shorthand. So it's a book about a boy in Glasgow. It must be like this. And I don't know. I think it's an older boy in Shuggy Bane, and I think it's about his sexuality and things too. So mine is much more about the system and how the system treats kids, and do they criminalize a boy like that, or do they try and throw down a rope and help him make his own way out of the kind of mess he's made? So that's more what I was looking at.
You came onto my radar because one of my subscribers passionately recommended, is it your penultimate book, Paper Cup from 2022, or was there one in between? Penultimate?
No.
And she is from New Zealand and she just loved it. Tell us what this one's all about.
So this one is about a middle-aged woman called Kelly, and she, at the start of the novel, is homeless, and something happens to trigger a desire to return back to where she came from, which was a long time ago, and lots of water has gone under the bridge, and she's a very different person from who she was. So the book is almost like a pilgrimage. It's Kelly making her way back to where she came from, but as she's doing so, in little flashbacks, you learn chunks of her life before she was homeless. So you see how she ended up where she was. And the closer she gets to home, you're also more aware of what she was running away from and what she's going back to face. And I set that novel down here in Galloway, where I live now. So it's a bit of a love letter to Galloway. Galloway is a bit of a forgotten corner of Scotland. It's on the way to, if you were getting the ferry to Ireland, say, from Scotland, we're down at the southwest tip almost, and you would get the ferry over to Belfast. But it's not on the way to anywhere else. So unless you knew of us, you could bypass Galloway, and it doesn't feature that much in literature either. The 39 Steps was set here, partially the John Hannay book, but in the main, it's a bit of an unsung jewel, I think. So I wanted to highlight what was on my doorstep. So that was part of the reason why I set it here. And also, it's really rich in history and culture. And I quite like when I'm writing, you're in charge. You don't want to be too indulgent, but if you want to write about somewhere that you think deserves a bit more attention, then why not? And what I also enjoyed was it made me get to know my adopted home better, because I was going out and I was doing bits of the walk that Kelly does and then coming back and writing about that and then going another bit. And I didn't do the whole walk, I did drive bits of it, but it made me feel a bit more embedded in this community too, which was nice.
And if it's not a spoiler, what's the title all about? Paper Cup. Lovely cover, by the way.
Thank you. Kelly's homeless. I have worked with homeless or people that have been homeless and had addiction issues. I'd written most of the book before I did that. Again, I didn't want to let somebody else's story bleed into this story, but I just wanted, I suppose, to check I was on the right track with the way I was thinking about it. And it was just creative writing workshops I was doing. But one of the guys that I was working with, he wrote this poem about his paper cup, and it was just beautiful. And it was all about this idea of it's something that's vulnerable, it can dissolve, but it's also strong, it contains something. But much more than that, when you have nothing else, the act of putting a paper cup in front of you, it's like you're saying, I'm vulnerable, I need help. And you're also opening yourself up to people abusing that, maybe kicking the cup over, potentially giving you money, but more often not. And so you can't just pretend you're sitting in a doorway waiting for a friend. It's like, that's where I am, that's who I am, that's what I need. And I just thought it was a really nice metaphor for this idea of resilience and hope, but vulnerability and fragility and being desperate as well.
It's lovely. And I don't know how much input or control you had over the illustration, but the cup has been transformed into a house on the cover.
Yeah, no, I didn't have any. I just saw that design and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was done in a way that it looks hopeful. It looks a bit naive, but not in a patronizing way, I don't think. It just looks like when you're little and you dream of a home, when you draw a picture of a house, that's what you would do. And it's so simple and honest, but truthful. And I thought a lot about, again, whenever you're feeling vulnerable, isn't it great to go into your house and shut the door in the world and just kind of recover? What if you don't have that? What if you're vulnerable and exposed all the time? And I just can't begin to wonder how that might feel. I'm always very conscious when I'm writing that I don't want any novel to be like a soapbox. Here's a lecture on homelessness, or here's what you should think, or here's what you should do. I just want to tell stories. I think sometimes quiet voices are the most interesting, the voices that we kind of make assumptions about or pass by. But equally, I can't say I'm a voice for homelessness because I haven't been homeless. So all I could do with this book was imagine if Kelly was me, what would I feel like? What would this be like? And that's the way I navigated that story. I'm not saying this is an experience that every homeless person would undergo. I'm just saying here's one woman at this point when we meet her in our life, she doesn't have anywhere or anyone, but she did. This wasn't what her plan was, and hopefully it's not what her future is. So let's just spend a wee while with her, and hopefully you'll enjoy her company when you're taking that journey with her.
There's a word I love in the synopsis on the inside flap that I'm going to just put in front of you and see what you want to say about it. Serendipity.
Yeah, it's a nice word, isn't it? Yeah, I think there's always this trade off when you're writing. I always like to make things feel plausible and authentic and as if they could happen. But at the same time, sometimes you have to move things along in a story and make situations occur that push the plot. So the way in which Kelly begins this journey, there's like a couple of different push and pull factors. And some of it does feel like, oh my God, it's like I was meant to do this, but I don't want to, but I'm being pushed and pulled. And I suppose in the main, I think I was feeling Kelly knows she can't keep running. She knows she has to go back. And so, of course, she can say, nah, I'm not going to do this. Serendipity doesn't lead you down a path, but if kind of the universe is nudging you and you were kind of wanting to go there anyway, but saying to yourself, no, maybe then that's a good excuse to say, oh, do you know what? Okay, I feel I have to do this. But deep down, she got to that point in her life where I think staying away from home was more scary than going back and seeing what she left.
As you were riffing on that word, it got blurry for me whether you were talking about yourself as the writer of this novel or about the main character and her choices and what's happening in her world, which I think might have been intentional. I think both things were going on, but it makes me think of how it's a fine line between writing a serendipitous story where things by chance happen, coincidences or whatever, and going on to the side of where it doesn't seem realistic. Is that something that you
Absolutely.
relate to? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I absolutely was very conscious that I have chosen to write a novel about someone that's homeless. And there's no way I would want to make light of that situation or trivialize it in any way. And obviously, when I was a police officer, you're seeing homeless people all the time, folk who have their whole lives in a plastic bag. And I'm well aware that these are real human beings with real needs and desires and regrets more than anything. So I didn't ever want it to feel like a sort of modern day fairy tale or something. It's absolutely not. There's a fair bit of darkness in it. But I think what lightens the novel is Kelly has got an amazing sense of humour, and she was one of those characters that just she wrote herself. Often that doesn't happen, but she just, another good Scots word, she bringed onto the page. She just appeared and was like, okay, follow me.
Teach me
And
that word. That's a new one for
she's
me.
just
Brit.
bringed,
How do you say
Breenged, bringed.
that?
She just she's got this inner grit and resilience, and yeah, life has been not kind to her, and a lot of that is her own doing, but she's got this ability to almost step out of herself and have a conversation with herself, like pulling herself together or in discussion with herself, but again, not in a way that seems trite, in a way that I felt if I was on my own all the time, I probably do already when I'm on my own. You have these wee conversations. It's like there's two of you going on in your head. So yeah, her humour, I think, gives the novel a lightness that otherwise it might feel a bit heavy. And equally the serendipity thing, it's it's not huge. It's just something that triggers her movements that someone else in the novel comes from the same place that she did, which I don't think in a big city like Glasgow is like a massive unlikely possibility. So it's just sometimes, like something can make you think of home, can't it? It could be a piece of music, it could be the smell of something. If you've been away for a long time, something might on another day not trigger that desire to return. But if you were feeling you wanted to anyway, it might just be enough.
The other word is a much plainer word, kindness. To me, like serendipity, it feels like that there are pitfalls that the writer needs to avoid to not over sentimentalize something, but that to show on sentimental kindness.
Yeah, I think you've got to be clear-eyed as a writer, 100%. And again, having been in the police, and my first four books were about the police, I was 100% conscious that it was going to be life in its honest rawness because that's what I'd experienced. And again, it's like people that haven't walked down those dark lanes and haven't seen those lives, they might think it's maybe not far-fetched, but the way that some people can live with so little and still have some sort of resilience or hope, or maybe not, maybe be utterly in despair. And I was only 20 when I was first in the police. So that really got under my skin. And I definitely feel as a writer, I wouldn't choose to write about a subject if I didn't feel I could honour it and honour it truthfully. But yeah, with compassion.
Kieron, what are you working on now?
Not really anything at the moment. There's quite a bit of promotion for the new book. So I've been doing that.
Book touring and all that. Is that an enjoyable part of the process for you?
It can be, but again, because of where I live, everything's like quite a drive away, or it's even up to Glasgow's 2.5 hours, so it involves overnight stays and things, or you do 3 events back to back, which is exhausting as well. I'm very grateful to get to do that, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy that. I've always find it hard at the start of a novel when you're promoting it, because it's like you're telling the story of the story, and you're not always sure yourself what the best bit is to talk about the book or the best readings to do, and you're not wearing it comfortably, if that makes sense. So the more you get into that, like Paper Cup, I'm really comfortable talking about. This Bright Life, I'm still like, why did I do that, or why did I make that choice? So it's a kind of a bit of a learning curve, which is mentally more tiring when you're kind of being asked questions that you've maybe not thought of. And again, serendipity. Often when you're writing, things just fly in, ideas fly in, nods to something you're not even on a conscious level aware of. And it's only later when you start to untangle that process, you're like, maybe that is why I set that there, or maybe that is why I had that character called so and so. And so, yeah, it's an interesting process. And next week, I'm going up to do a week's creative writing tuition up at the Scottish Writing School up past Inverness. So that'll be really good fun. But again, it's another, you're using your brain differently. So writing in its purest form is really freeing because it's just you in your head and you can go anywhere. But then there's always the sort of the accountability part as well. You have to make this story make sense, or you have to justify why you did this, or explain your process. And they're all interesting, but it's not as much fun as the blank page and the diving in. So I should be working on something else because I'm making myself sound like I'm desperate to do it. But I think I just need to let the dust settle on this book a wee bit before I begin something else.
When did your writing career begin? When was your first novel published? How many years ago?
Oh, can't remember. I think it was either 2008 or 2010. I'm not 100% sure.
In about 15 or so years, you have published 9 novels. You have not been sitting around resting on your laurels. That's an amazing output.
That's why my brain's run out of steam now. Yeah, it began basically because I'd left the police, working in the council, had 2 young kids. My husband was still in the police, and it was just that kind of moment. Anyone who's got young kids knows there's a moment where they start to become a wee bit more independent. Mine had just, one was at school and one was at nursery. And there's just a wee space appears where you think, oh, I could maybe read again. I could maybe, and I'd always written when I was younger, just for pleasure. So it was like a creative bit of me woke up again. I was doing more reading, I was doing writing, some short stories, but with no idea of what to do with them. And I was writing stories about the police actually. It was a way of almost reminding myself what I used to do. Because it's one of those jobs, if you're at a party and someone says, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a cop. They look at you differently. It might be with horror, or it might be with, you're not who I thought you were. But I was just interested in capturing those wee moments that kind of defined me maybe when I was younger. So I had a portfolio of different stories, some just about domesticity, some just all sorts of different bits and pieces. And I applied to do the creative writing masters at Glasgow University. So that was my portfolio that I sent in, and I got accepted. And that was where it was like a switch flicked. First, somebody else other than me thought my work was worthy of further examination, because you're writing by yourself and you just think it's indulgent and silly and nobody will want to read it. And also being at university, it was part-time. I could still work and go to college like sort of 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock. So it worked out really good. And we had some brilliant writers. Alistair Gray, the polymath genius, was one of our professors.
Wow.
So you were learning basically from people like that, just how they did it. There wasn't anything prescriptive about here's how you write a novel, but it was just like what I imagine being at art school would be like, here's, have some fun, splash about, experiment, but here's some guidelines or nudges that might help you. And I don't think I would have written my first novel if I hadn't had that freedom, but also the discipline of my tutor would want to see new pages every couple of weeks. And it wasn't a PhD, but it was quite intense. And that is definitely what triggered my first novel.
What have you read recently or at any point in your reading life that you'd like to recommend to my viewers?
Okay, 2 Scottish novels.
Oh, good.
So this one is The Trick is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway. I don't know if you know it. No. This was Janice's debut. She is a fantastic writer. Her ability with prose is just sublime. She just I don't know how she does it. I've actually heard her give lectures, and she's like a poet in the sense of she can take a whole afternoon to decide where to place a comma. That's maybe an exaggeration, but this novel is about a woman who's basically having a mental breakdown, and it's quite innovative in that it actually uses the text to signify some of her emotions. So there'll be bits where the words are sliding off the page, but it's not done in a hammy way. It's not over the top. It's just subtle enough that it just brings the whole story to life. And you're in the middle of a mystery, but she's such a compelling and powerful writer that you trust her, that she's going to get you to the end of it. So I would definitely recommend that one. And the other one is another Scottish writer. It's called Kieron Smith Boy by James Kelman.
He is a Booker Prize winner, but I have not heard of that novel. So what's it all about?
James was also a professor on the course that I did. So it was an eye-opening experience for me just to know how many good contemporary Scottish writers there were out there that I kind of wasn't aware of. He is just a past master in the sort of thing that I think I try and do, is like examining the small life and being quite holding a magnifying glass up and being unflinching, but using language very cleverly. So this book, Kieron Smith Boy, I definitely am. I would be lying if I said there wasn't elements of that novel I was thinking of when I wrote This Bright Life in terms of Gerard. Kieron Smith Boy just examines the life of one young kid growing up in Glasgow, and it does it in a way that is very much you're in his head the whole time. And it's maybe set in the 60s, I think, or the 50s, but it's about the time when there's still lots of shipyards in the city, tenements are getting pulled down, more modern housing is getting put up. So Kieron ends up living in it's surrounded by countryside, but it's still another housing estate, but it's just different from the sort of place that his parents would have grown up. And it just follows him on a journey, but it does it in a way that is, I don't think I've ever felt closer to a created character. It's like you're looking out of his eyes as you're reading the book. I just love his writing. And he's very fearless as well about if you need to have swearing language or if you want to use Scots. So it's like whatever serves the purpose of the story, don't ever apologize. And I feel that's important in my work too, that if you're going to set a novel in a community that speaks in a certain way, reflect that and don't water it down too much.
I wanted to end on this question, and now you've just set up a lovely segue. I think it's a bit cheesy for me to ask you, what is your favorite Scottish word? But tell us one or two words that somebody who hasn't read any Scottish literature or have had much to do with Scottish culture should know and start using around the world.
Okay. Today was not this sort of day, but dreich is a very good word. Dreich, Dreich, which
Okay.
is what our weather can often be. So it's grey, drizzly, a bit cold, a bit bleak, not full rain, just that kind of weather. You're like, it makes you feel the same as the sound of it, just you're just hanging about. So that's one. And another word, which as a proud Glaswegian is, I think, our motto, gallus. So
Yeah, Gallup
gallus,
encountered
you heard of
probably
that?
in Douglas Stewart's novels, but I can't remember what it
Okay.
means.
It's a bit like having chutzpah. It's a bit like that kind of swagger that you're just a bit full of yourself and like a cheeky confidence. You walk the walk, you talk the talk, and you probably are winging it a lot as well. That's the kind of sense of Gallus. So that's why I maintain that the sun's shining through, isn't it? Sorry.
It's not a what's that word? Dreesh? Dreesh day.
It's
The sun's starting to.
it's gorgeous. Yeah, I think a lot of the time the Scots language is so rich. If it takes you 10 words to describe the one word, that's why you use the one word. And folk can usually work out from what's round about it, what the word and the context is.
Kieron Campbell, I'm vibrating here. This conversation has been so stimulating. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
So it was one of my loyal supporters of this channel and top tier patron, Ellen in New Zealand, that told me about Paper Cup. And I tracked down the author and got her newest one. So I've got my reading cut out for me, and she was just an exquisite guest. I can't wait to have her back.
Hello, this is kind of editing Shawn. I realized I forgot to tell you about what I put up on my channel this week, because there's some weeks that I don't put up anything, but this week I did put up a fabulous chat with the Canadian author Nina Berkhout about her incredible novel, one of my favorite novels of recent months, This Bright Dust, which is I'm not going to insult it by calling it a work of historical fiction, but it's set back in 1939 in Depression-era Alberta when the royal visit of King George VI and his consort, Queen Elizabeth, who later became the Queen Mother, were passing through town. And if that sounds like it's going to be overly monarchist, what Nina Berkhout achieves with that part of the story is to create a quintessential dialectic about monarchism versus anti-monarchism. And even if that part isn't interesting to you, the characters are so indelible. Neighbors that grew up side by side on farms, and the boy and the girl are in love, but there's lots of obstacles in their way, and it's just one of the most Canadian novels I've read in a long time, and I loved it. Check out the chat I had with Nina if you are so inclined.
All right, so I have had an extraordinary reading week. I said it last week, and I feel it even stronger now. The reason I haven't been reading as much since I came back to Canada is because I've been alone without Kenji. And Kenji's not a reader. He has completely different interests, but being together just creates this je ne sais quoi in me where I just want to read and read because he's doing his own thing and we're so connected in other ways, and it's just incredible. So yes, I finished 3 5-star reads this week, and I can't wait to tell you about them. I have finished the Irish novel, The Story of Lucy Gault by William Trevor, and this was a pseudo-buddy read with my patron and big friend of this channel, Robin, and we had a lovely chat about it that will be coming to the channel in several weeks, probably knowing me, and we both really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read for me. It's a kind of quirky premise in that it's set in about 1921. It opens and it's an Anglo-Irish family, or at least the dad is Anglo-Irish, lived on his property for generations and generations. And it's the time of troubles, so there's lots of violence to do with the Catholics and the Protestants and the militant groups at that time. And one night, he and his wife, who's an English wife, and they have, maybe she's an 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, the rebels, the IRA, whoever they are, however organized they were, it wasn't completely clear to me that they were more than just kind of ragtag, but they poisoned the dogs and killed them. And then they came back a week later with the intent to light the house on fire. But the captain, the dad of this story, he wanted to scare them away, and he shot at them, and he actually hit one of them in the shoulder. And he felt so awful about it that he tried to offer them money. I went to see the family later because these families grew up in the same town and everybody knew everybody. It was a small town. But he and his family makes the decision that it's no longer safe to live in Ireland. And so they prepare to move, like I say, after generations. And Lucy, the 8-year-old, she is frantic in opposition to leaving. This is her home. She doesn't want to leave, and it actually gets to the place where she takes a rash action to force her parents to stay that results in the whole rest of the novel that takes us right up into the end of the 20th century. Everything, and it's tragic, but the thing that she does and the ramifications, there's a part of that I had to really work hard to not think it was a bit far-fetched. But I got over that the farther I got into the story, and so it's about lonely people and missed messages and miscommunication, or the absence of communication, and how that screws up a loving family, parents and the kid, and yet there's redeeming stuff at the end. And I think I'll leave my comments at that because you can't really say much about it without spoiling it. I thought it was a masterpiece, and a weird plot twist. It's not really a twist, but it served the novel admirably, and it's an incredible work of Irish literature. First came onto my radar from Bob the Booker, and that's 2 bangers that he's recommended that I've read in the last couple of weeks. So thanks, Bob. I have also finished the next Edith Wharton it's ended up becoming an Edith Wharton book club that I have with Chris of the Book Cougars, Dorian of One Bright Book podcast, and James of Caustic Cover Critic. We started out, I think, with, what's her name, Marion Engel, and we didn't get very far with her oeuvre before we realized that she only ever wrote 1 good book, I think, so we didn't read anymore. But now we're on to Edith Wharton. I think this is the 3rd one we've done, and this is a collection of linked novellas, although I think the word linked is deceiving. I think I supplied the adjective linked. They are not linked, but anyway, the collection is called Old New York, published in about 1920-something, 24. There's 4 novellas, and each is set in a different 19th century decade in New York. from the 40s, the 50s, 60s, 70s. And I would say 3 of them were masterpieces, and one of them was almost a masterpiece. No characters overlap, but there's certain themes about repression, conformity, individuality, and art woven throughout. I just loved it. We had a really incredible conversation. It'll take me probably months to edit it before you see it, but boy, did I love this collection. Probably my favorite was called The Old Maid. I think you might be able to find that as a single bound thing, but you should read them all. But The Old Maid, let me give you a little bit more about that one, just to tantalize you further. The New York woman of marriageable age, she's engaged to her cousin's cousin-in-law. These families have been intermarrying for generations, and she's engaged to this guy, but she's working as almost like a daycare, whatever it would be in the 1850s or 60s. She's looking after orphan children, and her fiance wants her to give it up. I don't want to spoil it, so how can I say this? So she breaks off the engagement because she's not willing to, and then she tells her cousin. The woman who's just broken off her engagement, I have to give some names for it to make any sense, is Charlotte, and her cousin, who she's so close with, who's married to a cousin of Charlotte's fiance that she's just dumped, Delia. Charlotte tells Delia why. She tells her a big secret, and that's the whole rest of the story stems from there. And so it's about the stranglehold on women of this era, continued for decades, continues into the present, but particularly severe in this time and place. There's such nuance in the relationship between the 2 cousins, Delia and Hannah, and the life that they go on to, how their lives intertwine from there. Can't say any more without telling you too much, but it's one of the best things Edith Wharton's written, I would say, that particular novella. I thought all of them were excellent. 3 of them I loved, 1 I liked. Old New York, check it out. The book that bowled me over that I finished this week is the Irish debut novel, The Language of Remembering by Patrick Holloway. It came out this year, just a few weeks ago. And I loved it with all my heart. I've just filmed a full review. I haven't done a full review for over a year, or at least a year. So that will be coming to you. So I'll just tease you a little bit. It's about a mother and son, 2 timelines. The contemporary one, the son, Oisin, he comes back after living for years in Brazil with his Brazilian wife and their 2 kids. And he's moving back to Ireland because his mom, Bridget, her early onset Alzheimer's, because she's not that old, she might be 50 something, early 50s. She has early onset Alzheimer's and it's getting worse. So comes back. She's still living at home with a live-in caregiver, and he wants to be physically and emotionally closer to her. And the past timeline is that same woman, Bridget, as a teenage unwed mother, getting pregnant in the countryside of Ireland. It's not a big town. I think it's in County Cork. And all the stigma and stuff and what happens. What do the families decide to do about this pregnant 17-year-old? And her pregnancy is with Oisin. And there's so much about language and trauma and connection and identity. It's really an incredibly powerful debut. You're going to have to wait for my review to get more. I do read from it. The writing is gorgeous. And this one captured my heart. All right. Let's see. I finished that one. That was the one I was reading to Mary Jean. Do you remember Loop Tracks by Sue Orr? It was one of my top reads of a couple of years ago, I think. I love this so much. It's one of the finest novels written in the last 10 or 20 years. New Zealand writer. And she was my mystery guest. I'll put a link to that chat. And I fully intended to do a full-length interview with her about Loop Tracks. And she agreed to do it. And then everything that happened to me last year, I'm not going to make a list. If you've been here with me long, you know that there was full of personal challenges last year. So I just couldn't even complete a review of the novel to prepare for the interview. So I know Mary Jean will absolutely love this novel. So I'm reading it to her. And that will bring it all back fresh for me. And then I hope Sue Orr will be willing to finally have a Zoom chat for a deep dive kind of interview. The resonance between Loop Tracks and The Language of Remembering is the unwed mother. And so this one opens, I'm just going to give you a very brief summary of the opening premise. She's 16 in 1978 in New Zealand, and New Zealand has just recently banned abortion. So all the New Zealand women wanting abortions, they fly to Sydney, and there's this secret network that gets them there, and they have people on the inside of the airlines that kind of supervise them and get them from point A to point B. And so this 16-year-old goes, and then there is a huge plane delay, and that's all I can say about the first part. And then we jump to 2019. That same woman is now, what would she be? 40 years later, 2019, in COVID era Wellington. The same main character, her name is Charlie, and all kinds of fabulous plot that ensues. It is just an incredible novel, and I'm so glad to be reading it to Mary Jean and rereading it so that I can hopefully interview Sue Orr this year. I might start one more. I might, because I have been invited back to the Bookcast Club book podcast, and Sarah and I are going to read and discuss Wild Sargasso Sea by Rhys. And I think I need to start this soon because I think she wants to tape it by the end of this month. I have read a lot of Rhys, but I have not read her most famous novel, which resonates with Jane Eyre. She's one of the finest writers that ever wrote, so I'm looking forward to getting into this. All right, so everything is just fabulous. Book-wise, husband-wise, and let's not talk about politics. Thanks for watching.